available in the public domain.
Last Friday, the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein announced the indictment of 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian companies charged with setting up an elaborate plot to influence American voters, among other things. The president tweeted, "General McMaster forgot to say that the results of the 2016 election were not impacted or changed by the Russians, and that the only collusion was between Russia and Crooked H, the DNC, and the Dems. Remember the dirty dossier, uranium, speeches, emails, and the Podesta Company." Fact check. First, the indictment had nothing to do with the collusion investigation. It was about Russian meddling. The collusion investigation, according to our reporting, is ongoing. Second, the extent to which Russian meddling did or did not affect the results of the election is an open question. The president also tweeted, "I never said Russia did not meddle in the election. I said it may be Russia or China or another country or group, or it may be a 400-pound genius sitting in bed and playing with his computer. The Russian hoax was that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. It never did." But the reality is the president has questioned the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election over and over and over again. He called the Russia investigation a hoax, a ruse, a Democratic excuse for the election loss, and a waste of taxpayer dollars just to get started. Here are some specifics. Back in September, the president tweeted, "The Russia hoax continues. Now it's ads on Facebook. What about totally biased and dishonest media coverage in favor of crooked Hillary?" And then in November, he told the press on board Air Force One that he believes Russian President Vladimir Putin is being sincere when the Russian president says he didn't interfere in the 2016 election. The president ended his barrage of tweets by criticizing Oprah Winfrey after the media icon appeared again on 60 Minutes talking of a group of Michigan voters, some who voted Clinton, some who voted Trump for president in 2016. The president wrote, "Just watched a very insecure Oprah Winfrey, who at one point I knew very well, interview a panel of people on 60 Minutes. The questions were biased and slanted, the facts incorrect. Hope Oprah runs so she can be exposed and defeated just like all of the rest." Oprah Winfrey has said she is not running for president in 2020. The president's spokespersons have been on television denouncing the Russian meddling. The president has not once, not on camera, not on Twitter, not anywhere. Let's bring in Caitlin Owens, a reporter for Axios. He had a busy weekend.
That he did, yeah. He touched on a lot of topics this weekend. But, you know, Shep, something I think that is we need to keep saying is the topic he did not touch on is what we're going to do next as a country to prevent this level of interference in our elections from happening again.
I've heard some of his spokespeople talking about the Russian meddling. In fact, he sent out a tweet just a little while ago acknowledging that there was, appearing to, here it is, he said Obama was president up to and beyond the 2016 election, so why did he do something about Russian meddling? It sounds to me like he's admitting there that there's Russian meddling, which I suppose is a positive, but there's been nothing about what we should do about it. There's been no call to action. There's been no rally cry. There's been nothing from this president on that front.
Right. It seems that right now the president is more focused on blame, on, you know, who's to blame for this, and he wants to point to Obama, he wants to point to Dems, he wants to point to the investigators themselves, saying that, you know, these investigations, if Russians wanted to create discord in American politics, it's the investigations, not the actual interference that, you know, helped them succeed. You know, so it seems that the president is taking this almost personally, and you know, just to make sure to cast blame elsewhere, and you know, to say, you know, I never said that this was a hoax now that there's evidence that it is a concrete thing. And also to make sure to repeat it over and over again. It seems that it's his biggest insecurity, that to say that this did not cause him to win the election, that he won it all on his own.
He actually called out one of his own for not saying that, when this is just the beginning. This is one track of this clearly multi-track investigation, and this track was about Russian meddling. It left wide open the possibility that there could have been, that there were other conspirators, co-conspirators. In fact, it mentioned them. We don't know who they are yet, but it's an open question.
Right. I mean, this investigation is very much still ongoing. It did not settle questions of collusion or obstruction. All the reporting that we've seen is suggesting that those investigations continue. We don't know if there ever will be anything else on those counts, but we just don't know yet. It's still an open question. So, while the president is very fixated on repeating over and over again that this did not show any evidence of collusion, that question is unsettled, as is the question of whether this influenced well, it did influence the election, but how much and whether he would have won anyways. And those questions law enforcement aren't going to weigh in on, and they're questions that, honestly, we probably will never know the answer to.
Caitlin, the Axios reporting is as follows, and others as well. The president had dinner with Geraldo and his sons the other night, on Friday night, after we got all of this information all day. And his aides told him he probably don't want to play golf this weekend because, 45 minutes from here is Parkland, where they're dealing with the death of 17 people. You should probably lay low. And that's when the tweet storm began, 13 tweets that went through the weekend until, I guess this maybe would be number 15 now on President's Day. And he did go play golf today. Is there anyone who's with him in the interim there to try to keep him focused or away from the tweet machine?
I think that the intention of keeping him off the golf course, at least, I mean, while it seemed like it was a very sensible intention, it put him in front of the TV. That's what the reporting is telling us, and it's just from watching the media reports of how this was all playing out that's what kind of really started the irritation in the tweet storms. So, and I think it's a well-known thing. Other people have tried to control the tweeting or encourage him to stop. And the president is going to do what he wants to do. And I think that these tweets, they're just kind of they're always going to be this kind of window into what he's thinking for the foreseeable future. He
at first said that this indictment was some sort of vindication for him, which, based on the facts and the reporting, it certainly is not. And it seemed that once he got back to the Mar-a-Lago there down in Florida, that's when the defenses went up, and that's when the tweeting came out. Right.
It seems like at first there was a sense of relief, because again, the indictments don't mention collusion or obstruction. So it seems like at first there was a relief, and I think that's how this was trying to be framed to him, that none of the Trump campaign or administration officials were included in this. But I think then it was just turned into frustration, especially over this question of how much the Russian interference contributed to his winning the election.
Certainly.
And I think we could see, through the tweets, we saw that shift in his mood.
Indeed it did. Caitlin Collins, it's great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you, too.
Yep, Caitlin from Axios.com. Some world leaders are apparently looking for help dealing with the mixed messages from the Trump administration, specifically the tweets. Because when the president tweets one thing and his people are there in front of them saying a completely different thing, it can create, well, a bit of confusion. Ahead, we'll show you how some U.S. officials are now handling it with a bit of advice about to whom they should listen and whom they should ignore. That's coming up from the Fox News deck on this Monday afternoon, President's Day. The head of the Environmental Protection Agency is pushing back on a planned trip to Israel. Comes as Scott Pruitt faces a firestorm over his expensive flights on the taxpayer's dime. An EPA spokeswoman would not say why the Israel trip is postponed, but the controversy over the cabinet member's travel made headlines last week when he admitted, yes, I took first or business class when flying instead of back in the back. And his reason? He says his security team recommended that he travel in the more expensive cabin to avoid confrontations with his critics. In other words, back in the back, they didn't much like him. U.S. officials are telling foreign leaders not to take President Trump's tweets on foreign policy seriously. That's according to the Washington Post, which reports that the conversations happened at a security conference in Munich over the weekend. Have you heard about this? According to the reporting of the Washington Post and others, U.S. officials spent time during the conference decoding the president's tweets, which sometimes contradict his own advisors. Rich Edson's at the State Department. Europeans say they're still getting used to Trump diplomacy as they're being told, ignore his tweets. Is that right?
Well, Shep, they're still trying to navigate U.S. diplomacy during the Trump administration. The German foreign minister, Sigmar Gabriel, summed this one up when he said, quote, maybe this can explain why we Germans in particular are so perturbed when we look across the Atlantic, because we no longer recognize our America. Is it deeds? Is it words? Is it tweets we should look at to measure America? Other European officials tell us that they've learned to rely more on what State Department officials and other American officials are telling them, but they say they understand that the president is the boss here, and they certainly don't want to be the subject or have their governments be the subject of presidential tweets. President Trump tweeted a year ago that Germany owed the U.S. and NATO vast sums of money. In reality, Germany is just spending less money on defense than the NATO target. Early on, President Trump refused to explicitly endorse what's called the Article 5, part of the NATO treaty that essentially says that any NATO country that's attacked, the other countries will come to its defense. That was while the Secretary of State and other U.S. officials were reassuring European allies that the U.S. commitment to NATO was ironclad. Then eventually the president did come out and say that the U.S. is committed to NATO. The president has feuded publicly on Twitter with Great Britain's Prime Minister, with London's mayor. There are also part of this relationship, and Shep, while all of this is going on, are ongoing negotiations now where the president disagrees with the Iran nuclear deal. He wants Europe to change the posture on that. And so the U.S. is working with these European governments, but they all acknowledge that it's a little bit different under this administration, Shep.
This concern goes beyond Europe, though, does it not?
Yeah, it goes well beyond Europe. In capital cities like Beijing, certainly across the Middle East, there were the tweets over the summer that the president did to criticize Qatar on terrorist financing. This was all during while the Secretary of State was trying to work with Qatar to end that blockade that's still ongoing in that country there. The president just a couple of months ago also tweeted criticism against Pakistan. That prompted an emergency meeting in Islamabad among senior members of the Pakistani government. And then shortly thereafter, the Trump administration did announce that it was suspending aid against Pakistan. So sometimes those tweets can preview a significant policy change, Shep.
Rich Edson at the State Department. Thank you, Rich. The U.S. intelligence chiefs say that Russia is already trying to interfere in this year's midterms. It's ongoing. Now we're hearing from local denies that it meddled in our election, even after the special counsel Robert Mueller brought charges against 13 Russians, including a wealthy restaurant owner nicknamed Putin's chef. He is much more. The indictment laid out how Russian operatives visited the United States, used social media to influence voters, even helped organize political rallies in this country. A spokesman for the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, said today, there are no indications that the Russian state could be involved in this. We still insist that such accusations are groundless. Russia did not interfere, does not have such a custom to interfere in other countries' domestic affairs, and isn't doing it now. But America's intelligence chiefs say Moscow is already gearing up to meddle in their next elections. Last week, they told Congress they're seeing Russian activity and interactions to target the midterms in November. Now, state elections officials meeting in Washington to talk about how to fight back. Peter Ducey has that news. He's live in Washington. Hi, Peter.
Shep, election officials from across the country spent the long weekend trying to figure out how to stop Moscow from meddling in the midterms, and the intel community is trying to help. They had a classified briefing hosted by the FBI, DHS, and Director of National Intelligence, who said in a statement that this classified session was all about, quote, increasing awareness of foreign adversary intent and capabilities against the state election infrastructure, as well as a discussion of threat mitigation efforts. And experts are telling us that there is a real threat to the integrity of the midterms.
States should be very concerned with the inadequacy of the current cybersecurity defenses they have in place. The endpoint security on most of those electoral systems is outdated, and it can't match up to the modern-day weaponry being created by the Russian cyber adversaries.
A DHS official told me a little while ago that right now 32 states and 31 local governments are being remotely scanned by the DHS. That is a probe for vulnerabilities that is not as intensive as the on-site DHS scans happening right now in 14 states that are not going to be done until April. Shep.
What do state officials say they're most concerned about, Peter?
For now, it's the propaganda peddled by Russians, because so far 21 states have been targeted by Russian hackers, but there have not been any major breaches.
The one thing that we're very confident of, and the one thing that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Homeland Security, and the Office of Counterintelligence are all confident of, is that there were no tabulation changes that occurred because of the infiltration or the attack or the scanning that actually occurred from the foreign actors.
And the Democratic Secretary of State of Connecticut is warning that voter registration lists may be especially vulnerable to hackers because they're all online. Shep?
Peter Ducey live in Washington. Thanks, Peter. The accused Florida school shooter facing a judge earlier this afternoon. That's as we learn more about the many warning signs going back to when he was a child. Also, we're hearing from the family who took the suspect into their home after his mother died. What they say he told them right after the school massacre.
Police have not yet arrested anyone there. The Islamic State claiming responsibility for a deadly attack outside an Orthodox church in Russia. This happened in the southwestern part of the country. Russian officials say at least 5 people died and 4 others were hurt when a gunman with a hunting rifle shot churchgoers as they were leaving the Sunday service. And search teams report they have found the wreckage of an airliner that crashed into a mountain in central Iran yesterday. Investigators say the crash killed all 65 people on board. According to local media, rain and fog made it difficult for crews to reach the site. An Iranian official says it is still unclear why the plane went down. The news continues with Shepard Smith right after this.
South Florida in court today. The accused killer in shackles, his head down most of the time, didn't speak. This was his first physical appearance in front of a judge. Last week, he appeared through video conference. Today's hearing had to do with keeping certain documents confidential. We're still waiting for prosecutors to say whether they'll pursue the death penalty. One attorney says it was designed for this type of case. The public defender in the case says the accused killer would plead guilty if prosecutors take the death penalty off the table. There's a lot more involved here. Also today, we're hearing from the couple who took in the accused killer after his adoptive mother died. They recently told the South Florida Sun-Sentinel newspaper they did not know they had a monster living under their roof. And today they told Good Morning America on as good people who tried to do the right thing by helping the young man. The couple said had they known of his disturbing social media posts, they would never have let him in their house. We have Team Fox coverage now. Steve Harrigan outside the courthouse in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. First, Trace Gallagher with more on the couple who took in this accused man. Trace?
Shep, Nicholas Cruz went to live with James and Kimberly Sneed last Thanksgiving, just a few weeks after his adoptive mother died of pneumonia. The Sneeds say they took Cruz in because their son was his friend and he asked them to. They knew Nicholas Cruz owned guns, but they bought a gun safe and put the weapons inside. James Sneed says Cruz did not have. 2:18 is 3 minutes before the shooting began. When the SWAT team called the Sneeds and asked where Nicholas Cruz was, they didn't know. Then they texted their son, who was fleeing the school at the time, and they say they quickly put 2 and 2 together. Shep.
They talked about him being depressed, Trace.
Yeah, they said he followed the rules, was very polite, but they describe him as being immature, quirky, and depressed about the death of his mother. Kimberly Sneed, who's a nurse, even tried to get him some counseling. But they had no idea about the things that Cruz was posting on social media, and they saw no signs of any animal cruelty. In fact, they said he loved their animals. That's why they were so baffled by the attack. Here's Kimberly Sneed talking about Valentine's Day. The Sneeds say Nicholas Cruz told them that when he was 22 years old, he was set to inherit about $800,000, and they saw paperwork that appeared to support that claim. Shep.
Trace Gallagher beginning our reporting. Thank you. Team Fox coverage continues now. Steve Harrigan's outside the courthouse in Fort Lauderdale. Steve?
Shepard, this was our first live look at the suspected shooter. 19 years old Nicholas Cruz came out in a red jumpsuit, that color reserved for the most violent offenders. He was shackled around the waist with his arms. His ankles were shackled as well. He spoke nothing during the brief courtroom proceedings. He also looked down the entire time, making no eye contact at all. Broward County Sheriff says he's being kept in solitary confinement. He's also under suicide watch. The sheriff explained that means there are eyes on him at all times. His public defender says Cruz is likely to plead guilty to 17 counts of first-degree murder in an effort to try to avoid the death penalty. Shepard.
The governor's asking for answers on tips missed, Steve.
That's right. Perhaps the biggest scandal so far, the biggest drop ball, is the FBI admitting that it dropped the ball on a call to its tip line February 5th. The caller mentioned Cruz by name, said he was close to him, said Cruz had a gun, was erratic, wanted to kill people, and was possibly a school shooter. The FBI did nothing about this, according to reports so far, and the Florida governor is just incensed about it. He says the director of the FBI should resign and that all information about this tip should be released immediately. But this is not the only organization to drop the ball in this case. This 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz began to get in trouble back in middle school. He was disciplined from his schools at least 40 separate times for violence, for drawing swastikas, for smashing into people, for violent outbursts, for fighting. Also, the police went to his house more than 30 times over a 6-year period, calling 911 on the average once every 2 months. And finally, a report now from the DCF, the Department of Children and Families. Their counselor visited Cruz at home once with his mother and determined that he was low risk to harm himself or anyone else. So it seems like every organization along the way dropped the ball with this 19-year-old suspected killer. Shepard.
Steve Harrigan with us from outside the courthouse. Steve, thank you. Let's turn to Bob Bianchi now, a defense attorney, a former prosecutor. Man, Department of Children and Families, local police, county folks, the state folks, federal folks.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
You know, Shep, when I was head prosecutor, we were dealing back in 2007 with a thing called intelligence-led policing, where policing today is not so much at the end of a gun, but a computer terminal that's assessing data, doing triaging, red flagging. I mean, there were so many points of data here that this kid was in trouble, and specifically that he would commit an act of violence at a school on both the federal, state, and local level. It's confounding that it wasn't picked up.
What could you have done besides talk to him? Could anyone have done?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, if he hasn't actually committed a crime, there's not much that they could do. But you know what? How about what we call a welfare check? How about going in and letting him know we're watching you? This has an effect right there to slow him down a little bit. Let's see if he's purchasing weapons. If we see a lot of weapons being purchased, that's consistent with what everyone else has been saying about the kid committing an act of violence. And then, if need be, because there is a psychiatric history there, perhaps looking for an involuntary commitment.
On the death penalty, as that's an issue in Florida, one of the lawyers said this case was made for this, not if he's found to have mental issues that are serious and ruled such by a judge, right? Is that how it works?
Okay, so as a person who used to make these decisions, I'm not a fan of the death penalty, to be honest with you, but I do agree with this prosecutor. If there was a case where the death penalty was appropriate, it's this one. So he's not going to win on the insanity defense. That's in the guilt phase of a case because he knew clearly what he was doing, even if he was mentally ill.
Who makes that decision?
Well, ultimately, a jury makes the decision, but what the experts will do is goal-directed behavior. He clearly planned it, plotted it, tried to escape, which shows that he knew the difference between right and wrong, and that's the standard. Very hard for the defense to win. We're all